Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be cross-posted between YouTube and Patreon to remind folks that if you wanted to reach out for lessons, the best way to do so is through the Patreon. If you are a paid subscriber, you get lessons included with your subscription. So if you're a paid subscriber, please reach out to schedule those. If you're a free subscriber, little known fact, you get one free lesson a year. So make sure you reach out to schedule those. And let's get started. So this lesson, I'm going to talk about key centers and how we should have a little bit of a dual thought with what a key center is. To understand this lesson, I'm going to lay a little groundwork here. We're going to need to know a G major scale in 2 octaves. So let's look at that. All right. And if we were to split that G major scale where it repeats at this G, where it's first repetition, right? So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. That's your first split. You end up having 2 patterns. The first 2 patterns are on the G and the D string. It would be. And the second 2 patterns start on the D string, but mostly on the A and the E string. Great. So if you take that first pattern, what you want to do is think of it as just a pattern. Great, and then we're going to move that down a string. So instead of starting on the G string, we're going to start on the D string. What that has done is now we have moved everything up a fifth, and so that is now a D major scale. That's just a really easy, quick way to find a D major scale, and we can do the same thing for a C major scale. We can take the top half of a G major scale, and we can move that inversely up a string, so going a fourth. So instead of starting on this G note on the 5th fret of the D string, we'll start on the 5th fret of the G string on a C. Awesome. Now you should probably take the time to actually find the full full 2 scale or 2 octave scale. But I want to leave some of this up for discovery, right? I find that the most impactful lessons I've had have been stuff that people have told me, and then I've taken the time to actually find those notes in other places, and it kind of stuck a little bit better. But if you're getting lost, remember that we all kind of use these clip-on tuners, some version of them, and they will tell you what note you're playing. So you can take that D major scale or the C major scale that we just kind of learned based off of a G major, right? So if we take this G, we move it up a string, and we're not sure what notes we're playing, we can actually take our tuner, go through note by note, find those, and then you can know what notes that you're looking for once you move it up an octave. I think it's imperative to kind of put that work in, right? That's going to help you learn the fretboard, but also get you thinking about what notes they are, and the tuner is such a good reference for this. So now, we have a G major scale in 2 octaves, we have a C major scale in 1 octave, and a D major scale in 1 octave, but that's enough to tell us what notes are in each scale, right? When we're talking about key centers, typically it's kind of on the face, right? That we're in the key of G. We're going to start and resolve there. So that is thought of as the root chord or the key center. But for some of this analysis, and I'll give an example in a moment, we're going to need to think about what the relationships of those notes are to the harmony chords being played underneath them, as if that chord is the key center, right? So for example, so let's take a common extension phrase over a song in G, like a G, G7, C. That's one you've probably heard in a lot of different styles of music, especially bluegrass. But what is that actually doing? So if you think of it linearly, what we're really doing is we're walking G. You can actually hit the passing tone here of that F sharp to the F to the E, and that E becomes the 3rd of C, right? So we're kind of moving linearly to where C is. That's voice leading in general terms, like when we're thinking about some of the arpeggio exercises that I've put up on the channel. That's kind of the idea, right? We want to move to another part of the chord that's now being played during our solo, right? So that G7 is expressing the same type of voice leading, right? But what it's actually doing is it's taking a note from the chord that we're going to, it's stealing it for a second until we resolve on that C kind of, as like a mini resolution, right? So here's home away from home, here's another home away from home, and then here's so you got 2 vacation houses and one normal property. So what we want to do right there, what that seventh is doing, it's outside of your key center, right? When you're thinking of it from the key of G. But if you think of that F note from the key of C, it's actually the fourth, right? So we've kind of taken that F note from the key of C, we've put it in a G scale, and we're using it to go to C. So that's very imperative that you understand that you can only really use it in that one spot, right? So for example, right? Up to that point, if I played an F, it would have sounded more tension and sounded out because the chord wasn't moving yet. So when you're thinking of this line that you're playing, you really need to understand, okay, what am I doing? Am I static in the chord? Am I moving in the chord? Or am I resolving? So that's the next thing we want to think about. If we look at a D major scale, which we just learned, it has one similarity with G in that it has that F sharp note. But what it doesn't have is a C natural. It has a C sharp note. So that seventh note in the D major scale is a C sharp. Well, that's not in a G major scale either. So we need to think of that as a way to transition, right? So you can think of that two different ways. I can use the F sharp that's naturally in the arpeggio to transition back super easy, right? But what we also can do is the exact type of seventh change that we just did for the G. So think G, G7, C, right? If we're in the key of D now, for the moment, well, its fourth is G. The same as G going to C is its fourth, right? Does that make sense? So G, A, B, C is your fourth note in the scale. That means when you're going from G to C, that's a fourth change, right? So if I'm in the key of D all of a sudden, if I go from D to G, that would be a 1 to a 4, right? So we can use the same kind of concept in that we can use that kind of flattened seventh of the D to back into the third of G, right? So what we've done here is we've taken the same idea and used it in two different harmonic contexts, right? So the first harmonic context would be what we're kind of used to hearing, G, G7, C, and a line that would sound, right? I did it a little differently there. That's more of the example that I gave before. Either one is valid. Either way, if you're using or, right? Those are two ways to kind of back into the E note and to kind of resolve your harmony on the 4. It's not a complete resolution, right? It's not really resolved until we get all the way back to G, right? So these are just ways to kind of tie the chords together, right? So what the meat of what you're playing in that chord is going to be different than what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the connection tissue between the two, right? So if we're thinking of it of the D now, we're gonna, so G, G7, C, D, right? We can do D, D7, G, and it didn't even sound like it was out, right? Because the real extension, the 4-note extension of D makes it a dominant chord, long story short. But what we can do is you can use the same kind of thought process where we were going. We can actually move that up a string again, and now it's a fifth away, right? So those are ways to think about this stuff in a more analytical way and kind of create some connective tissue, right? So if we're just doing this as a simple exercise and we're going to play arpeggios now. All of a sudden you get a little bit of a roadmap there. And that's a sound you probably should have heard before. Right? So those are just super easy ways to think about this, right? And from there, you can make your lines as complex as you want them to be, but what's probably going to stay is the, right? So it's, I find it funny, no matter how complex I get. Kind of comes back to the same language because that's how I've learned to move through these chords. So I hope this lesson helps, and I hope you've gotten some out of it. Again, reach out on Patreon if you're interested in getting a one-on-one lesson. I'd love to help, and we'll see you guys at the next video.